The first time Earth heard the name Zorith Dominion, it came as a whisper through a broken satellite transmission. Half garbled static, half terrified plea. No one really knew what it meant. Not yet. But something in that dying voice, broadcast across a wide-range emergency frequency, didn't sound like any language we spoke. And still, somehow, it made the hairs on every neck stand up. For years, the governments of Earth dismissed it as a hoax, or maybe just a lost deep space probe malfunctioning. But in secret, the military started watching the stars. Then came the Velnari Archive. A drifting object, smooth as obsidian, hollow like an urn, crashed through the exosphere and landed in the Nevada desert. It didn't explode. It hummed. Inside were images, millions of them. Whole species, planets, civilizations rising and falling in a cycle that always ended the same way. Fire, then silence. All of it, always overseen by the same black insignia burned into every last scene. 3 downward-pointing triangles encircled by stars. It was genocide, and we weren't just spectators. We were next. By the time the United Earth Assembly declassified the archive, it was already too late. Probes vanished. Orbitals blinked out. Every deep space comm went dead in one synchronized silence, like the whole universe held its breath. Then the first ships came. They didn't announce themselves. No theatrics, no diplomacy, just raw efficiency, like exterminators. They took the moon first, not in battle, just in presence. Their ships hovered like quiet tombstones above the lunar surface. Then they began to extract. Not resources, people, moon miners, scientists, orbital engineers. They were taken in groups, no remains, no bodies, just empty bunkers, dead transmitters, and the same symbol left scorched into steel walls. Some fought back, small militias, rogue defense units. None returned. But Earth still didn't act. Fear became policy. Presidents made statements about peace, resilience, patience. They begged for time. Meanwhile, the Zorith Dominion kept watching, testing, measuring. And that's when we met Marin Vale. She wasn't a general, not a president. She was a failed astronaut, discharged after a failed Mars mission left half her team buried in dust. She'd spent the last 7 years scraping metal in underground tech pits for cash. She lived off expired ration packs and slept in a hangar behind an old scrapyard near Houston. But she was the first one to shoot one of them down. Not a full Zorith ship. A scout drone, about the size of a shuttle, moving low through Texas skies. No one else even saw it, but Marin had rigged an EMP cannon out of stolen parts and rusted Martian alloys. She fired it from the back of a pickup truck. It crashed in a fiery ball that lit up half the county, and suddenly, Earth remembered how to fight. Within hours, underground resistance forums lit up. Engineers, hackers, ex-soldiers, and outcasts started piecing together what little they knew. The mainstream government still wouldn't move, too afraid. But the people were done watching. That's when the Zorith made their first real move. They didn't attack a base or city. They hit Lagos, no warning, no demand. Just a heat pulse so strong it turned concrete into glass. Half the city went dark. 2 million people gone in less than 7 minutes. And the galaxy, the wider cosmos? They watched. There were other species. That was the most horrifying part. Dozens, hundreds. Some lived in glittering space havens. Others drifted in forgotten ruin. They all knew the Zorith. Some had been spared. Others had bowed. But not one of them moved when Lagos burned. That was the cycle. Observe. Survive. Submit. But Marin Vale didn't do any of those things. She stood in front of the smoking crater that used to be a city and looked up. She was live-streamed. Pirate signal, black market satellites, underground networks. And she said 5 words that rewrote the galaxy. "We will not die quiet." The stream went viral in minutes, not just across Earth, but beyond. What few knew was that the Velnari archive wasn't just a warning, it was a signal, a tracker. Every time someone accessed it, fragments of that signal pulsed into subspace like a flare. The Zorith had expected fear. They had expected silence. They hadn't expected Marin Vale. Her face, smudged with soot and blood, broadcast through hacked orbital dishes and redirected probes. Her voice, ragged and furious, broke through jammers and alien static. Resistance cells, long dormant, blinked to life like old stars reigniting. Someone had finally said it. Not the diplomats, not the generals. A woman with nothing left had just declared war. But war didn't come easy. By the end of that week, the Zorith retaliated. They targeted 3 more cities: Seoul, Buenos Aires, and Prague. They didn't even fire weapons. Instead, they used gravitational field disruptors, collapsing buildings inward like they were made of paper. And in each crater they left the same symbol, burned into the bones of the earth. Still, Marin didn't stop. She gathered others like her, exiles, criminals, broken men and women who'd been tossed aside by a world too scared to act. They called themselves the Shatterborn, a name stolen from a children's myth about a star that exploded but refused to die. Their headquarters? A half-buried research facility in the Mojave, once owned by a forgotten tech company that tried to mine dark energy. They powered it up with what little solar panels remained, and stripped old satellites for data. Marin didn't care about diplomacy or permission. She wanted answers. The key came from a man named Tarek Jin, a xenolinguist who'd been dismissed from the UN Space Sciences Council after claiming alien contact during a blackout in Antarctica. No one had believed him. Until now. Tarek decoded the archive further. What he found wasn't just footage of destruction. It was a manual, a process. The Zorith didn't destroy planets out of rage or sport. It was a harvest, a galactic cycle. Every few centuries, the Dominion culled species nearing Phase 3 emergence, the point where they could rival Zorith technology. Not out of fear, but control. They didn't want competition. They wanted the illusion of peace maintained by absolute dominance. But humans? We weren't ready for Phase 3. Not officially. We had almost gotten there. But Earth, divided and distracted, never crossed the line. The Zorith had come early. They weren't culling a threat. They were killing potential. That was their mistake. Because Marin understood one thing the Dominion didn't. Humans don't need to be ready to fight. They just need a reason. The Shatterborn began sabotaging Zorith drones, small surgical strikes, hijacked a satellite in orbit and repurposed it to broadcast encrypted blueprints of alien tech back to Earth. Dozens of rebel groups emerged. In Nairobi, a mechanic used those blueprints to turn a garbage truck into a mobile EMP launcher. In Berlin, kids hacked into Dominion frequencies using old VR headsets, and then came the first kill. A Zorith Commander-class enforcer ship went down over the Atlantic just off the coast of Senegal. The blast came from deep below. Some claimed it was a repurposed nuclear sub. Others whispered that it was something older, a secret weapon buried during the Cold War. Whatever it was, the ship didn't just fall. It screamed as it broke apart, like metal mourning its own death. And the galaxy felt it. On distant colonies in other systems, long-silenced civilizations blinked to attention. The Targu in the Perseus Rift sent encoded vibrations into dark space. The Avira, long thought extinct, began transmitting from inside a black hole. And far beyond even them, the Krenosh, a race who hadn't moved in 3,000 years, whispered 3 words across the star lanes. The cycle cracks. But the Dominion didn't stay passive for long. In orbit, they deployed the Silence Engine, a black obelisk larger than a city, positioned just outside Earth's magnetosphere. It wasn't a weapon, not in the conventional sense. It pulsed with a frequency that began shutting down our thoughts, causing seizures, blackouts, memory loss. It made people forget how to resist. Within days, entire populations began falling into catatonic states. Cities turned into graveyards of the still living. Whole nations went dark. But Marin Vale, already marked by cosmic radiation from her Mars mission, was immune. And maybe that was luck. Or maybe something else. Because inside her head, something had started to whisper back. Not human. Not Dominion. Older. Something buried deep in the archive, waiting for someone brave or broken enough to hear it. The voice in Marin's head didn't speak like we do. It wasn't words, not at first. It was more like memory, emotion, instinct. The moment the Silence Engine activated, most of Earth's population dropped to their knees, minds fraying like threadbare cloth. But Marin stood under that oppressive, skull-humming sky, still breathing, still burning with clarity. And inside her mind, something opened. She saw a world, not Earth, not any planet known to humans. It was glass and storms and twin suns burning purple in a sea-green sky. A species knelt beneath an obsidian tower, the same shape as the Zorith's Silence Engine, but cracked, ruined. Their minds had shattered under its weight. And yet, one of them had stood, bleeding, screaming, and before that ancient tower collapsed, they sent something into the void, a seed of thought, a scream carved in code. That scream had been waiting. Until now. Marin collapsed. Not unconscious, but overwhelmed. Tariq Jin found her an hour later in the desert, curled under the shadow of a broken wind turbine, shaking. She didn't speak for another 12 hours. And when she did, her voice wasn't quite hers anymore. "They didn't build it," she said. Tariq blinked. "What?" "The Zorith. The Silence Engine. It's not theirs. They just found it and copied it. And they don't understand it, not completely." Tariq leaned in, a cold sweat crawling down his neck. "Then who did?" Marin looked up at him. "Something older than memory, and it's still alive. They called it the First Mind, or rather, that's what the emotion translated to. A force born at the beginning of sentient thought across the universe. Not a god, not a monster, just a witness. And it hated the Zorith, because they weren't keepers of order. They were leeches. They took the tools of the ancients and wielded them like children with knives, slicing the future into pieces before it could form. But the First Mind couldn't act directly anymore. It had fractured, scattered through time, buried in echoes and relics. Marin was one of the echoes now, and with her came knowledge, not full blueprints, not immediate power, but fragments. The Shatterborn built a device, a resonant cage based on Marin's visions. When activated, it blocked the Silence Engine's influence within a 10-mile radius. It was clunky, took 15 car batteries to power it, but it worked. They tested it in Detroit, now a ghost city of the catatonically silent. When the cage activated, people woke, coughing, sobbing, screaming. Many had been trapped in their own minds for days. Some remembered nothing. Others remembered everything, including the faint whisper in their dreams, calling them to rise. But the Zorith noticed, and they descended. Sleek, obsidian troopships landed in a spiral pattern around the city, black smoke hissing from their hulls. They moved in perfect formation, drones and enforcers sweeping the streets with laser precision. They didn't speak. The Dominion never did. They just took. And Marin had had enough. With less than 300 Shatterborn fighters, a hacked drone army made of repurposed delivery bots, and a handful of stolen Zorith weapons, she launched the first counterstrike of the human rebellion. It wasn't clean. It wasn't elegant. But it was furious. Molotovs made from hydrogen tanks, EMPs in microwave ovens, snipers hiding in abandoned skyscrapers. And at the heart of it, Marin carried something new, something given to her by the echo of that ancient civilization. A shard of void light. When she activated it, reality twisted. The nearest Zorith enforcers turned to salt. A cruiser above them crashed into its sister ship, as if magnetized by gravity gone wrong. The sky rippled, and the silence engine blinked, not shut off, but confused. It had never encountered resistance like this. It couldn't process defiance. The battle lasted 19 hours. When it was over, Detroit was rubble, but it was human again. And the news spread. The resonant cage plans were released into the underground web. Cells around the globe began building their own. People woke up. The slumber broke. And across the galaxy, something ancient stirred in its slumber. The Dominion called for reinforcements. The First Mind whispered its warning, and Marin Vale, battered and bloodied, stood atop a ruined tower with a rifle slung over one shoulder and ash in her teeth. "We are not your children," she spat at the sky. "We are your reckoning." By the time the Dominion's reinforcements arrived, humanity had already changed. In just under a month, cities that once knelt under the silence engine began building their defenses. Not from governments, not from world leaders, but from the people. The official world powers still clung to their polished speeches and closed-door treaties, hoping the Zorith would negotiate, even as their skies darkened and oceans boiled. But the rest of Earth had seen Marin Vale in Detroit. They had seen her standing on the wreckage of an Enforcer-class war machine with nothing but fury and a strange, burning shard in her palm. She wasn't just a woman anymore. She was a signal. And signals spread. The Shatterborn were no longer a handful of rebels. Their numbers exploded. Pilots, mechanics, hackers, ex-felons, medics, anyone who still remembered how to think for themselves, anyone who still believed Earth didn't need permission to survive. They established rogue territories. Dark zones. Places where the silence engine's influence couldn't penetrate because of hundreds of resonant cages built from salvaged appliances and alien junk. They weren't pretty. They weren't stable. But they worked. And in those zones, something new happened. Humanity started adapting. Fast. Tarek Jin and his crew at Mojave Base began translating more fragments from Marin's visions. They called them memory bursts, crashes of alien instinct that gave strange insights. One burst showed them how to manipulate magnetic shielding in a way that bent Zorith weapons fire. Another revealed the principles of sound-based cloaking, turning vibrations into invisibility. It was as if evolution had cracked open and decided to sprint. But the Dominion wasn't sitting still either. They deployed the Reclaimers. Not machines, not drones. These were organic, twisted biomechanical things shaped like humans, but stretched, modified, created from the harvested remains of conquered species. One looked eerily like a Martian colonist from a failed Russian expedition. Another wore the skullplate of a Targu noble long thought extinct. These things didn't speak. They screamed, a psychic wail that shattered eardrums and ruptured minds. Their mission? Eradicate resistance. Not just kill, but erase. Marin faced her first reclaimer in the ruins of Jakarta. She'd come to deliver a shard of void light to a rebel cell, only to find the entire city overrun. The reclaimers moved like smoke and thunder, crushing tanks, ripping through steel, immune to most human weaponry. But they weren't immune to her. The void light shard pulsed as she approached, humming like it remembered them. The reclaimer turned its many-eyed face toward her. For a second, everything froze. Humans, drones, even the sky. Then the air collapsed inward, the shard activated. Light bled out in tendrils, curling into the reclaimer like knives of memory. It convulsed, twitched, began to unravel, not explode, unmake. Its skin peeled into static, its limbs folded into code. It screamed, not in rage, but in recognition, as if it knew her. When the thing vanished, nothing was left behind but dust and a small silver coin with the mark of the old Avira civilization. Marin fell to her knees, not out of exhaustion, but because her brain was bleeding. The shard had taken more than energy. It had taken memory. She couldn't remember her father's face. She couldn't remember her favorite song. She looked up at Tarek and asked, "Was I ever on Mars?" And that was the cost. Every time she used the shard, it gave humanity a weapon and took a piece of her soul. But she kept fighting, because somewhere in the whispers, something had changed. The first mind was no longer just watching. It was awakening. It began to reach out to others, across the dark zones, across Earth. Not many, not enough, but some. Children, mostly. Those with open minds and broken pasts. One of them, a blind girl in Morocco, began drawing symbols she couldn't see. They matched Marin's visions exactly. Another, a boy who hadn't spoken since his parents died in the Lagos burn, started chanting coordinates to a star system long thought dead. The first mind wasn't just hiding. It was choosing. And the Zorith knew it. They issued their first direct transmission to Earth, intercepted by rebel satellites. One sentence. Return the fracture or be undone. No voice, just pressure. A sensation of dread thick enough to bleed. The fracture. They meant Marin. She wasn't just a resistance leader now. She was the glitch in their control system. And glitches? Glitches don't stay still. They came for her at night. No warning, no ripple in the sky, no buildup of heat. 1 second, Marin Vale stood in the underground war room beneath Mojave Base, going over encoded schematics of a potential orbital strike system built from scrap satellites, and the next, the ceiling caved in with a sound like a god snapping its fingers. They didn't send ships this time, or drones, or reclaimers. They sent a collector. It didn't look like anything human. Towering, thin, almost liquid in the way it moved. It had no face, just a mask made of shifting plates, constantly rearranging to reflect whoever looked at it. When Marin stared at it, it wore her own face, broken, scared, young. She didn't run. She stepped forward. All the alarms screamed. Tarek Jin was shouting something behind her, voice cracking. The Shatterborn guards pulled rifles, but none of it mattered. Because Marin wasn't made of fear anymore. She was a fracture, and fractures break more than they bend. The collector didn't speak, but its intentions hit her like thunder in her chest. It had come to retrieve what didn't belong. The shard. The voice. Her. But something was different now. The first mind wasn't just watching her anymore. It was with her. She could feel it in her bloodstream, in her memories, in the ghosts of her thoughts. As the collector reached out, Marin stepped closer, slowly pulling the void shard from the pouch strapped across her back. "You want this?" she whispered. And then she smiled. "Then bleed for it." She drove the shard into the collector's chest, not with strength, but with purpose. The moment it touched the thing's core, the world around them fractured. Light split, time bent sideways. The collector screamed, not aloud, but inside everybody's heads, like a million echoes of someone you loved dying all at once. It didn't die, it collapsed, pulled inward by the shard like it had never existed. The air boiled, the concrete cracked, and Marin vanished with it. Gone. For 3 days, Earth went silent. No marine, no Shatterborn transmissions, no sign of the Mojave base, just a crater where it had once stood. Some thought she had died. Others claimed she'd ascended. The world mourned. And then, on the fourth night, every unregistered satellite across the planet activated at once. Screens flickered to life, old televisions, dead monitors, even radios and vending machines. Marin's face appeared. She looked older, pale, eyes like dying stars, but she was smiling. "I'm not gone," she said. "I just went somewhere they didn't want me to see." Behind her, the feed glitched. Shapes flickered. Maps, coordinates, images of alien tombs, shattered moons, cities folded inside black holes. Then symbols, hundreds of them, raining across the feed like alien snowfall. Tarek Jin, watching from a safe zone bunker in eastern Siberia, gasped aloud. "They're resistance worlds," he said. "Old ones, places the Dominion failed to wipe out." Marin nodded through the screen, as if hearing him across the world. "The cycle wasn't perfect," she said. "They missed things. Survivors, ghosts, seeds." Then her voice changed, deeper, wiser, less alone. "They thought they could end us before we bloomed, but they forgot. Some flowers grow in ash." And then the screen cut. In her absence, something extraordinary happened. All across Earth, people began to wake up before their resonant cages activated. Whole cities, like New Delhi, Havana, and Damascus, woke with no resistance at all. The silence engine faltered, its field destabilized. Whatever Marin had done when she pierced the collector, it had damaged the Dominion's control in ways they couldn't fix. But not everyone took it as good news. The unified Terran Authority, what remained of Earth's original governments, called her a threat. They branded the Shatterborn a terrorist faction, claimed Marin had triggered irreversible cosmic contamination. They issued orders to detain any Shatterborn operative on site. But it didn't matter. By then, the Shatterborn were no longer a faction. They were a movement, a wildfire, a memory that could no longer be erased. And out beyond Saturn, deep in the Oort cloud, the Zorith began building something. Not a weapon, not a fleet, a mirror, a massive interdimensional array capable of folding time itself to reach backward and unmake Marin Vale before she ever touched the void. They were scared. Truly, finally scared, because they understood what had been born. And the galaxy? The galaxy had started watching again. Not in pity, not in silence, but in hope. They called it Project Reset. The Zorith Mirror Array, stationed just beyond Neptune's orbit, wasn't meant to kill Marin Vale. It was meant to erase her before she became her. To reach back and fracture her history so that the Void Shard never found her hand, the First Mind never whispered to her, and the rebellion never burned. It was elegant, horrifying, and something only the Dominion could construct without shame. But they underestimated humanity again. Because while they prepared to rewrite the past, humanity was rewriting the present. Marin had returned, not to Earth, but to Axis 4, one of the lost resistance worlds revealed in the satellite broadcast. Orbiting a collapsed star, Axis 4 was home to ruins so old they whispered even when silent. She wasn't alone, either. The First Mind had left others there. Remnants, beings whose consciousness had been fractured by the original wave of silence engines thousands of years ago. They weren't alive in any biological sense. They were stored, preserved in crystalline memory pillars, barely clinging to sentience. When Marin touched one of them, her blood screamed and her brain split. But she saw everything. The original rise of the Zorith, the first culling, the desperate pact made by 100 civilizations to embed their legacy into the deep subconscious code of the universe. A psychic failsafe. And more importantly, the blueprint, not a weapon, a seed, a set of instructions on how to rebuild a soul after silence. Marin sent the data burst to Earth using frequencies not used since the birth of the stars. Tarek Jin, holed up in a resistance bunker in Norway, decoded it in 5 sleepless days. His skin peeled from radiation burns. His mind began to fracture. But what he found changed the war overnight. Neurotemporal resonance. The human brain, under the right pressure and aligned with void light, could interfere with Dominion time mirrors, not destroy them, corrupt them, shift them just enough to make history stutter instead of bend. It meant one thing. If they could build enough amplifiers on Earth and synchronize them with Marin on Axis 4, they could stop Project Reset. But there was a cost. The process would burn the minds of everyone linked to the signal. A psychic firewall created by human will alone. Once initiated, those connected would die. Not physically, but mentally. Gone. A living death. No return. And yet, tens of thousands volunteered. They called them the Remembered. Doctors, coders, farmers, runaways, veterans, children. Their memories uploaded into crystalline vaults, to be preserved even after their minds were lost. Their last thoughts synced into a living net of resistance consciousness. Marin activated the first signal node on Axis 4, using a construct of her own blood and void light. Earth followed. 15 resonance towers built by scavenged tech and shattered faith erupted to life across the planet. In the ruins of Moscow, the flooded streets of Manila, the overgrown shadows of what used to be Boston. The final node was set to go live in Nairobi, where the first reclaimer had fallen. The Dominion launched every remaining enforcer unit toward Earth. The mirror array began to glow, and then something happened. As Marin synced her pulse with the array, she felt something new inside the first mind, something deeper than even memory. It was pain, not pain like a wound, pain like mourning, because the first mind hadn't just witnessed extinction, it had survived it, alone. Billions of voices reduced to a single scream stretched over time, and in Marin's soul, it had found a chance to scream back. "You are not my weapon," it whispered inside her bones. "You are my echo." The last tower in Nairobi went live at 0342 UTC. Across space, the Zorith mirror activated. A wave of blue-gold light surged from its core, spiraling backward across time, searching for Marin's timeline to sever, and hit the firewall. The Remembered activated in unison, and Earth's sky turned black, not with smoke or ash, but with memory. Faces, names, lives, love, rage. A psychic scream so loud the stars bent to listen, and the mirror array cracked, not physically, existentially. The past stuttered. The present held. Marin Vale didn't vanish. She solidified. And on the Dominion command ship orbiting Titan, a Zorith warden dropped its command staff and whispered, out loud, for the first time in centuries, they anchored themselves with will. And worse, they cannot be undone. The mirror array shattered in silence. Not with a boom, not with fire, but with the sound of nothing happening. A terrifying stillness where inevitability used to live. The Zorith watched in disbelief as their most precise weapon, their answer to history itself, folded into a knot of useless memory. It hadn't just failed. It had been denied. Earth hadn't just blocked the reset. Humanity had rewritten the rules. But there was a price. Across the planet, tens of thousands of minds, the Remembered, went dark. Bodies still breathing, eyes still blinking. But no one home. They sat or collapsed wherever they were when the signal passed through them. Some died on their feet, some smiled. Some cried just before the light left their gaze. Each had given everything, but not all were lost. Because the crystalline vaults, The mind cores built beneath the rebel cities glowed, not with sorrow, but with presence. The remembered weren't gone. They had become part of something new. Tarek Jin was the first to notice it. He stood in the resonance control bunker in Norway, staring at the Mind Vault interface. It had no AI, no power, and yet the screen began to flicker. "We are here." He fell to his knees, weeping. "They're still with us." And across the galaxy, species once silenced by fear began to speak again. On the scorched remains of Nari Prime, the dormant volcanic cities of the Gex lit up with blue fire. On the ruined gas giant Zalarian, old Kranash transmitters, long thought corroded, broadcast a single symbol into space, a human hand raised. The cycle had broken, but the Dominion hadn't. Not yet. On Titan's orbiting command platform, Supreme Arbiter Zor, over 900 years old, armored in void steel, bloodless, issued the only command they had left. Send the Sunbreaker. It was a myth, a weapon of legend, a failsafe built for one purpose, to crack a planet's core and scatter its remains across its star system. It had only been used once, 1,000 years ago, when the Avira homeworld dared resist. Now it was Earth's turn. The Sunbreaker emerged from a folded rift in the void, a titanic structure bristling with heat core siphons and energy lances. It made the moon look like a pebble. It moved into position slowly, deliberately, because the Dominion wanted humanity to see it coming. They wanted fear to return. But Earth didn't flinch. The Shatterborn had already begun evacuating civilians into underground networks. Orbital defense grids, once hacked together messes of rusted satellites and junked probes, now pulsed with first mind resonators. Marin's stolen shard had been replicated twice, enough to create 2 more void cores, and each had been planted in orbital spears aimed directly at the incoming threat. But they weren't enough. Marin knew it. The Sunbreaker's core was unlike anything she'd ever seen in her visions. It didn't belong to the Dominion. It wasn't Zorith technology. It was older, repurposed from a dying star, perhaps gifted by something even the Dominion feared. The kind of tech that ends eras. And then the first mind whispered to her again. There is one way. She knew before it finished. The shard inside her, the original fracture, could detonate. If synced with the other 2, the resulting pulse could overload the Sunbreaker and cause a feedback explosion through its siphon core. But it meant death. Real death. Not disappearance, not echo. No returning to the vault. No preservation. She would be gone. Marin stood in the ancient ruins of Aexis 4, sky glowing with strange auroras, and recorded her final message. It wasn't dramatic, no anthem, no speech, just a quiet smile and 5 words. Let them watch us live. The Void Core spears launched from Earth in a staggered sequence. Marin's pulse traveled with them, riding on a frequency only the first mind could generate. The Dominion's systems, precise, clinical, arrogant, never saw it coming. When the 3 cores aligned with the Sunbreaker's siphon ports, the sky turned inside out. Time bent, sound inverted, and the Sunbreaker cracked like an egg. The shockwave tore through the outer rings of Saturn, slicing the Zorith fleet in half. Their command ship split clean down the center, its onboard AI screaming in ancient code before disappearing into quantum vapor. And Marin Vale became a star. Not a metaphor, not a symbol. A literal light now burns in the dark, orbiting Earth's far side. An artificial star of void shard and memory, pulsing softly, like a heartbeat. They call it the Fractured Dawn. And the Zorith? They fled. Not just from Earth. From everywhere. Whole sectors of the galaxy lit up with rebellion. The silence that once coated space like dust was gone. The stars were noisy now. Defiant. human. They never came back. Not the Zorith. Not their reclaimers. Not even their drones. After the destruction of the Sunbreaker, after the shattering of the mirror array, the Dominion vanished like cowards in the dark. Like they'd never been gods at all. For the first time in galactic memory, Earth stood alone and unafraid. But peace didn't come easily. The Shatterborn found themselves navigating a new kind of war, the rebuilding of a world broken not just by alien hands, but by silence, by fear, by the slow rot of forgotten courage. There were cities to unearth, children to awaken, minds to mend. There were the remembered, souls forever hovering between light and shadow, stored in crystalline vaults like ancient prophets waiting to speak again. And there was Marin Vale, or what was left of her. The fractured dawn orbited in perfect rhythm above Earth, casting no heat, only light. Soft, white, pulsing light. Scientists couldn't explain its makeup. Engineers couldn't map its energy. Priests wept in front of it. Survivors sang to it. And across the galaxy, rebels tuned into its signal like pilgrims reaching for something divine. Somewhere inside that star was still her, a voice, a memory, a scar carved so deep into time that not even the Dominion's best machines could erase it. Tariq Jinn, now old and half-blind, became the steward of her message. He published everything, her visions, her words, her decisions. He named the record The Cycle Shattered, and he refused to let anyone edit a single word. On the 1000th day after the Sunbreaker's fall, the first mind returned. One last time. Not with whispers, not in riddles, but with a gift. A signal pulse hit Earth's old radar stations in waves, rhythmic, deliberate. Hidden inside it was a map, one that spanned across galaxies, a pathway of ruined worlds, ancient vaults, and forgotten resistance strongholds left behind by those the Dominion had silenced long ago. Humanity had survived. Now it would liberate. Ships were built, not warships, awakening ships, carriers of resonance towers, mind cores, and the voices of the remembered. These weren't armies. They were messengers, bearers of noise, truth, memory. And so began the Great Uprising. Not a war, but a reckoning. Humanity didn't conquer. They reminded. They returned to worlds the Dominion had burned and planted shards of the fractured dawn in their soil. They taught survivors how to speak again, how to remember. They played Marin's message on the winds of alien skies. We are not your children. We are your reckoning. On Axis 4, the ruins were rebuilt into a university, the Vale Institute of Resistance Memory. No statues, just echoes. Her name wasn't worshipped. It was remembered in every tongue by every species. She had become more than human. She had become proof that no matter how powerful the silence, one voice, unbroken, unbent, could shatter it. One planet, fragile and overlooked, could flip the entire script of the stars. And the galaxy watched. But no longer in silence, no longer in pity. Now they watched with awe, with respect, with a kind of ancient fear. Because Marin Vale had been just one woman. And that woman had taught humanity how to shout. And the universe, it would never forget that sound again.